Welcome to CRM MVP Podcast, episode number 38. I will be your host today, but I have a bunch of guests. This is pretty cool, and we're actually shooting this during the CRMUG Summit, which is the largest CRM conference of the year, is one that I'm super excited about, and that's because it's the conference where we go and we can actually meet a lot of organizations that are using the product, and we get an opportunity to just hear from them and how is it giving them results. It's one thing to hear from Microsoft and some of the other, partners on how organizations should use the solution, but are they really using it that way? This is sort of the conference where we have an opportunity to do that. And on the last episode, I talked about the top 10 things I never do in Dynamics. And one of the things that I mentioned on that episode is that I wanted people to challenge me. I wanted to come to this conference. I wanted people to tell me what they thought about it. I wanted people to tell me if they disagree with it, and they did. They definitely told me they disagree with it. But, one of the things that keeps coming and people keep making reference to is that whole argument about managed versus unmanaged solutions. And, they would ask me in different ways. They would say, Gus, did anybody change their mind? Or Gus, talk about managed solutions. And we even had an Ask the MVP session today. And, one of the questions was managed or unmanaged solutions, right? Trying to sort of stir the pot. But, one of the things I decided to do is I wanted to invite a few people, that I obviously respect, have a ton of experience working with Dynamics, so we can maybe put this issue to rest, tell the world our opinion about it. And I invited them not knowing what their opinion will be, not knowing what they think about it. But I think that that's the beauty about hearing, people that agree with me. That's what I'm shooting for. I'm hoping for. And maybe all of you guys will disagree with me, but I wanted to start obviously first with some introductions so you get to know who's here with me. So let's start with Neil Benson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gus. It's great to be back on the show again. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This is the third time for you, right?
I think it's the third time. That's right.
That's awesome.
Here at the Dynamics 365 User Group Conference. This is by far my favorite Dynamics conference every year. Like you said, it's all about the customers. We got 7,000 or 8,000 Microsoft customers here this week, and it's just great to meet those people. I brought a couple of my clients along from Australia, and it's wonderful to meet them. So my name is Neil Benson. I am a Dynamics CRM MVP from Brisbane, Australia, and it's a wonderful pleasure to be back on the show. And I'm here to represent Managed Solutions all the way. I always use no, hold on, I got that wrong. Sorry, Unmanaged Solutions. I've never used a managed solution in my life. What am I, some kind of ISV? Are you kidding me? No way. It's Unmanaged Solutions. Looking forward to disagreeing with you, Gus, all over this podcast episode.
This is going to be over quick. I feel like the discussion is going to be over quick, but we'll see. So, Nick, welcome to the show again. You've been on the show too before.
Yeah, this is my second time on your show, Gus. And thanks for having me back.
But it's the first time we're actually talking about something technical.
That's true. Unquote. That's true. Yeah, I think we had a great discussion on diversity last time, and I think it was pretty well received as well.
Yeah.
But we're back talking about tech today, which is awesome. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nick Dolman. I am a business applications MVP for this second time now. And also I've started my own podcast with other MVP Colin Vermander called Refresh the Cache. It's about portals.
Who's that guy?
Colin's another Canadian, Gus.
Oh, yeah.
I know
him very well.
The politest podcast in the world.
The politest podcast in the world.
We don't disagree with anybody.
So we're going to mix it up a bit. We're going to actually put on hockey equipment next time, and that's how Canadians get angry with each other. So. Yeah. So, but here we're talking about managed versus unmanaged solution, and I am going to go with the "it depends."
All right.
Answer.
Well, we're going to get into that. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see what you think about, and when does it make sense to use one versus the other, which is going to be good. But go ahead, Aiden. Welcome to the show. This is your first time.
Thank you, Gus. Podcast? It is. It's my first time recording any podcast, so I'm excited to be here. My name is Aiden Cascella. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia. I'm a business applications MVP, and my background, I was with a partner who had a vertical solution. I was with them for about 10 years. Then I'm currently an independent consultant, and so now I have an opportunity to work with a lot of organizations of various sizes and seeing how they've implemented solutions already in their Dynamics process.
That's awesome. And then finally, we decided to invite a non-MVP to the show. Now, I'll say this before.
Future MVP. Maybe.
Yeah, so I'll say this. From all of the people who I've interviewed that don't work for Microsoft, meaning they don't qualify to be an MVP, the other people who have been on the show have been Ulrich and Sarah Jelinek before they became MVPs. Now they're MVPs. So, Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gus. Yeah, my name is Seth Bacon. I am I'm a manager out of RSM, and I've been doing Dynamics for the last 7 years now, and so I've seen it come a long way. Started with 2011. Started as an end user, and so that's one of the things I love about the Dynamics communities. Is I started with Dynamics communities, started coming to Summit as an end user, and then finally went on to be with a partner. And so it's great giving back and being a part of the training and giving back to the training and giving back to the community. You built me up a lot there. It's funny. I think somebody shot a picture. I think it was Nick earlier today of all the MVPs that are bald. I feel like there's a haircut that requirement now. So, but no, it's been good. It's been fun. I think the other thing that I enjoy doing is training and teaching. And so that's been a lot of fun. Started the baconbites.com. And so that's my sort of way to give back in small little tidbits that people are getting started with the product. Because it's a long journey, but there's lots to learn, but there's a lot of opportunity to learn from great people that are out there. And Dynamics communities is a part of that journey. That's
awesome. And, Seth, you are obviously on the show for the first time, and you're on the show with 4 MVPs. But at the same time, you're here to obviously, represent the non-MVP community, and you bring your own experience. I really appreciate when you provide feedback, and he's always, dead on. So, we're glad to have you. Looking forward to the discussion. And again, we don't need to start, I guess, picking sides. I think that before we start battling this out, if there's going to be a battle, I don't know, maybe we all agree on this thing. But before we start going down the path, how about we talk a little bit of history? How about we talk a little bit about what unmanaged solutions are, managed solutions? When did that concept come from? Because, I started working with Dynamics in 3.0, and then I started working, as an admin in 3.0, then more as a professional in 4.0 and beyond. We didn't have this concept of unmanaged and managed forever. This was introduced later on, at least when I started working with it. Neil, how about you give us a little bit of history on managed versus unmanaged, and why do you think Microsoft introduced this concept?
So my recollection is in CRM 2011 was the first time that the solution framework was first released. And before that, I started working like you with CRM 3.0 and 4.0. And the option there was to export all your customizations. So you did get a solution file of sorts. I can't remember if it was even called that. It was just all customizations. And that was your solution package. You could then transport those customizations into a target environment. So that was how you released stuff into production. And then in 2011, this new concept came around of solutions that could be exported from your development environment as unmanaged or managed. And the idea behind that was unmanaged was a way of exporting customizations that could still be customized in your target environment. Managed solutions, the idea behind that is a solution publisher, I could lock down those solutions so that they couldn't be customized. And there's various uses for that and various reasons why that was a good idea. But with the ability then to import multiple solutions into your target environment, layering became really important. So the sequence of how you imported things and then how the UI kind of gets rendered as a result of the different solutions that are installed is pretty critical. And there's quite a lot of things you have to learn about the solution framework in order to figure that out, rather than just wait for the system to calculate how the user interface behaves, because it can sometimes be a little bit unexpected. So you have to know how the solution framework works so you can get the right result for your users.
So Nick, looking back at managed solutions and unmanaged solutions, what are some of the first few things you started noticing working with managed solutions that perhaps were like roadblocks or maybe not roadblocks, but things that you noticed that you weren't used to? Because again, like Neil was mentioning, when we work with unmanaged solutions, where they weren't even called managed solutions, they were just called solutions. It was sort of simple. Like it was, I'm not saying it was perfect, but it was sort of simple. You knew that if you import it, it will override whatever was there. Like it was just straight up forward. It was easy. You cannot uninstall. You cannot remove it. You import, it overrides stuff. It will either add, new things, or it would edit whatever was there. and that was it. I mean, we still had dependencies and all of that, but there was nothing complicated about it. It was sort of a simple solution. So Managed Solutions came out. You start working with it. How was that experience?
Well, so I've been working with the CRM since version 1. So yeah, there's no solutions until version 2011. And I remember specifically at those times, Microsoft, and very much today, we're preaching for the partners anyway, build verticals, build vertical solutions. And also they're also trying to help get the ISVs, hey, build software for Microsoft CRM. It's a great platform. Having come from a Great Plains background before that, Great Plains had a very rich, and I still believe they do, a very rich ISV community where they enhanced that product with ISVs, and Microsoft is hoping to do the same thing with CRM. The problem was, though, if a company was to build a CRM solution, they could build it, but to kind of transport how you would install it and things like that was very difficult and tricky. So they had these concepts of accelerators and whatever, but that customizations file that would contain that would be, you would import it into your CRM3 or CRM4 solution, into your environment. And then anybody could actually edit that, play with it, make a copy of it, call it their own. So there was really no protection of IP. All of a sudden they announced, we're going to do this thing called Managed Solutions. We'll be able to lock it down. ISVs were like, good, we're going to be able to build our solutions, and it's going to be protected and locked down and compiled, and no one will be able to do anything like that. Well, that was a bit of a misconception. So the concept came out, unmanaged versus managed solutions, and then you could still take a managed solution and you could still see how it was built and replicate it and things like that. It really truly wasn't locked down from an IP protection perspective. But then we've seen the other ISVs, like you look at a particular example, Click Dimensions, and a shout out to Matt. Click Dimensions is a case of, they do have the solutions, but their true power of the ISV is their connectivity to their Azure cloud, where they do all their magic and their secret sauce. So kind of going back to the original question of what we kind of run into, of course, I had my own company at the time. We were a good Microsoft partner. We started, building out these managed solutions, importing them into our customers. And then we had customers that were empowered, and of course the customers would go in and they would go into their production system and add their own fields and views and things like that. And then we realized, we want to remove this managed solution we did, and all of a sudden it was, I don't know, it was kind of stuck. It was like, a rusty bolt that wouldn't come out of the system because these guys have sort of added that they've added dependencies on top of that. So that began to cause a real problem. And then the other thing you kind of ran into, working on a project, we were, trying to, be the good Microsoft partners and following managed solutions. And there wasn't really any good documentation or best practices around application lifecycle management. And look, again, it was like you don't know what you don't know. And then all of a sudden we're looking at a customer and like, okay, we're gonna need to move that managed solution or make a change. And then we're looking at our own environments and like, okay, hold on a second. Where did that managed solution come from? Do we still have that in our dev system? How is that? Where is that? Where is that file? Where is that database backup that has that managed solution? Is it this one or is it that one? And it was like, oh crap. So we realized in order to keep, we have to make much better governance around where that managed solution is. And at the end of the day, it's like, what's the point of doing it this way? Like, what benefits are we getting? Because what's happening is with this layering and all this other confusion going on, great, we can, quote unquote, we have the ability to uninstall that managed solution. Well, but why would we want to do that? If we're going to build something for a customer, it's because they asked for it. We're already going to be continually enhancing. So we kind of got away from that, and there was really no regrets. I never regret importing an unmanaged solution into any system because we can do a lot with it. Whereas I, have had some clients where I'm like, yeah, man, I wish I used that unmanaged because I would have solved a lot of problems. So, and then some other issues. Now, on the flip side, like I said earlier, it depends. If you're an ISV and I think it's important that it's managed, because you want, maybe there's a particular ISV that does this particular thing, or you're just evaluating it. You can install that on a solution, on a platform. You could try it out, do it, even a pilot period. And if you decide at the end of the pilot period that this particular solution or application is not for you, or you want to consider a slightly different one, then you can uninstall it. And then that way it's also great for upgrades. So, for instance, when
maybe.
Well, maybe. Well, that's what I was going to get to next, because for those of you who know me, I've done a lot of work with portals, and it's for those of you who out there, maybe there's a few of you who have tried to remove ADX Studio version 6, and it wasn't even ADX Studio's fault. It was a Microsoft update that kind of caused a bit of an issue, and it wasn't, you actually had to install a later version and an uninstall and do some dark magic.
They can become painful. But, and we need to talk about the pros and cons of both unmanaged and managed. But before we do that, there's one thing that they both have in common, which is that whether you use unmanaged or managed, that is the way we move functionality from one environment to the next, right?
Yep.
And you mentioned application lifecycle management. So I want to go to Seth, and I want you to talk about sort of the best practice, because that was another thing I heard, during the conferences when I talk about don't customize production directly. And I said on my first session during the conference, I talked about the unbreakable rules of CRM administration. One of the rules was don't customize production directly. And I talked about what was sort of my minimum recommendation when it came to environments that you should have. And I said, as a minimum, I recommend you have a development environment, a testing environment, or a user acceptance testing UAT environment, and then production at a minimum, right? But why do people need multiple environments, Seth? So how does that process work? What is the application lifecycle management like? Why do people even need multiple environments?
Yeah, so where we've seen this with clients is they have developers, they have people that are writing code, they've already implemented the system. And after they've implemented the system, they need to make updates, right? The system, the users always want something new. Microsoft's released new features. And so they need a safe environment for developers to extend the system and to meet those new requirements. And so with that, you need to have that safe place for the developers. So there's one environment. You also have production still running at the time, so that now you have two environments. You have at least development and production. But now, before you release it out to everybody, you need to make sure that code that's been running meets the user's needs. And you don't want end users back in the dev environments, because things are still being developed. And if you're using the agile approach, you still may have things that are maybe not completed yet, they're still in progress, but you're trying to do testing at the same time. And so trying to have all these different players right in the same environment can cause a lot of issues. And so that's where you start to introduce this concept of test or QA. And so having that environment where end users or testers are able to get in there, having finished features developed and deployed into that environment is that concept. And so now we have those three different environments. And so now what we need to be able to do is, how do we manage it? How do we take these features that the developers have built over the last week, this last sprint, and how do we bring that into each of the environments? And so that's where we start getting into this concept of we needing a tool to be able to leverage building things through, not replacing the whole data set each and every time, and being able to bring those features through the system.
Seth, what's the greatest number of sandboxes you've seen that sit behind a single production instance?
So the greatest number of sandboxes is probably 5 or 6, and it's a number of reasons why people do that, and if they have different testing teams, or if they have different developers even, so depending on how the customer wants to develop the solution itself. So probably 6 or 7.
Yeah, I've seen 5 or 6. That's pretty common in enterprise deployments. I remember one project I worked on with Microsoft Consulting Services, and they had one development instance per developer. They had quite a few developers in the project, like 7 or 8 developers. Yep. So there was 7 or 8 development instances, then some build, integration, test instances, and it was a lot of engineering for what was a relatively small number of users in that project. And I never quite understood why they had one instance per developer. That's not a pattern I'm familiar with. Never needed to use it. I don't know if anybody else has had that pattern.
That's a best practice, actually, to have an isolated environment for each developer. So not so much for a large
follow-up
project.
Question after that. So with that, Neil, how do you manage when everything needs to come back together, or if somebody needs to leverage the same field or table or something.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, this is where it kind of gets into is really more for the plugin development and things like that. Because if you're building and testing plugins, and maybe Aiden can probably pitch in on this one a little bit more, but this is where for the isolated, we're talking Visual Studio type developers, not configurators.
Right.
Configurators could work in a shared environment just because.
Right. But still, like, why is that a best practice? Like, what do you gain by having separate instances rather than separate solutions, for example?
Because when you're developing if Aiden's developing a plugin and I'm developing a plugin, and we're trying to test our plugins on the same environment at the same time, we're going to get into an unfriendly discussion of who wrecked whose stuff.
Does that have things to do with locking the records and stuff?
Well, there's even let's say I'm writing on a plugin on the account entity, and Aiden is also doing that. And they could be updating data or doing different fields. So maybe my code is not done yet, but I've deployed that plugin or there's a bug in it, and then Aiden's working on his plugin and he actually runs a test, and of course it's firing my plugin. That's where you run into issues.
Yeah.
Wow. We have a similar challenge in my current project at RECQ back in Brisbane. We have functional consultants all working on the same form. So, you get clashes there. So our Scrum Master came up with this magic wand of customization. So it's a physical wand. She bought it in like a dollar store, and we have 4 of them. So there's one for the account form, one for the contact form, one for the case form, and you have this wand on your desk. It means I'm customizing the contact form. Nobody else can touch it right now. It's like
Lord of the Flies who has the conch.
Yeah, that's right. So that's working really well for us. There's less contention now, but we got to fight over the wand. At least we don't fight over the form.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Aiden, for you, do you agree with that best practice of having one separate instance per developer? Like, that sounds like super intense, though, that you're going to be clashing like that. I mean, it sounds like code is dangerous. You should
I hear that trap.
I have heard that setup. I haven't used it, though. I've worked in, I'd say, relatively smaller development teams on client-specific implementations. And we would run into cases where we were trying to write code against the same entities, and the case that Nick was describing would come up. We would try to, because we were on smaller teams, we were able to segment the work out. So we have different functional areas. So maybe one person's working on the sales components while somebody else is working on the customer facing stuff and somebody's working on the marketing. Or, if we have integrations, we can break it up functionally. So I know that doesn't really handle situations where a lot of work needs to be done on the same entities, but it was how we went about avoiding it without worrying about, spinning up additional instances or anything like that.
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of both managed and unmanaged. And I think this is where we're going to go deep into. We're going to start seeing whether it makes sense to do one over the other. So when we think about unmanaged, obviously it's pretty straightforward, right? You export. If you import into another environment, you overwrite everything that was there, and you can uninstall it or anything. It's sort of old school. It's like how I remember functionality. So if you have to think about the disadvantages of unmanaged solutions, is that the fact that you lose that flexibility, the flexibility of rollback if you're not happy with what you imported, the fact that you can test, a solution, and if you're unhappy with it, take it off, or an app or whatever it is. That would be the sort of the downside of it. But what else is the downside of using unmanaged solutions?
So one of the disadvantages of the unmanaged solutions is, again, when that goes to prod, if somebody has the keys to the castle, they can change it. In prod, they can make those changes, and you end up with end users that maybe weren't as trained as well as they should have been, or you have a system administrator or a configurator that has access, and they get that request, that hot email that comes in from the VP of sales and says, hey, this needs to be changed immediately. And so it's they just need to move the column in a view. And so it's a system view. They just need to move the column over, or remove the column, or update whatever column it is in the system view. And immediately you have technical debt at that point, because you have something that's in production that is not in any of your other systems. And so as soon as you start going into that scenario, somebody that's trying to do a quick fix, they're trying to keep the end users happy, Often I see that trap happen with new administrators, and it's one of the things we talk about often with new administrators is making sure that they understand that yes, if you use unmanaged solutions, that's fine, but you have this huge responsibility now that you have this power as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. So,
But can you edit a managed solution directly in production?
not managed. So this is unmanaged.
As a publisher,
Customization,
I can
yeah.
choose what level of customization I will give to
Sure.
my managed solution when it's imported into a target. So
And by default, what's the level of customization that you have?
Cool.
I don't even know. I've never
get-
published an
No,
unmanaged
you get everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you look at it,
Custom- you have
unless
to
it's
shut
an
it off.
ISP,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's dumb.
So that's where you start running into the ISVs and stuff like that, because they want you to configure some things, but not
Right.
everything. And so because their code base is on it. But yeah, it's a great point, Gus, that just because you have a managed solutions, it doesn't lock everything.
And
the problem with that, sorry, Nick, to interrupt you there, but the problem with that is that what happens if you change something? Nick,
In the managed,
in the unmanaged.
no, a
on
change
the managed solution,
in
right?
production.
Well, if you change something on that, now you've got that layering on top of your managed solution.
Which means
You have that rusty nut that you can't get off your machine.
exactly. That is why I'm such an advocate for not using managed solutions unless you're an ISV, is because it's easy to break it. It's so easy. Like just adding an option set to an option to an option set locks it up forever, which is a huge problem. And then what happens? I mean, there's so much more to talk about on there, but let's talk about, before we get into and just completely obliterate managed solutions, let's talk about the advantages, because I hear obviously your advantage, which is we want to prevent people from edit production, but we just talked about the fact that by default they can. If you don't purposely lock up your managed solution, they will be able to edit it. However, and I talked about this in the last episode of the podcast, however, the idea is that you train people so they don't do that. I mean, that's the whole point of it. You train them, you follow an application lifecycle management. You obviously mentioned that anything in production directly is off limits, and you follow a process, dev, test, production, or whatever it is. And by the way, you had an interesting question, Neil, earlier about how many environments you've seen, and I've also seen personally like 5 or 6. However, I had a student earlier on a conference this year. She said she was working on a public sector project. They had 19 sandboxes, and they weren't for separate developers. They were like for different things. Like I asked her like what, and she said, well, we use an entity just to do security roles and security configuration, then another entity just for like workflows, and then another one for just for. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen that. That seems to me like it's more of a headache than the just give you the best practice ability to like what is it that you're gaining by doing all of that?
That sounds crazy. I've seen different solutions for packaging up those things. So we have a solution just for the workflows, or a solution just for entities, or another one just for
Security
views
or
or
whatever.
dashboards. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I can understand the logic behind that. But I wouldn't have a different instance just for building those things. That's
insane.
Good luck.
Yeah. So, again, I just don't see that advantage as an advantage. I feel that by the time you put functionality in production, you're not going to be uninstalling it, which is another advantage that people talk about, the ability to uninstall. But then
I've never needed to uninstall a solution.
Well,
with the exception that Nick mentioned, which is trialing stuff.
Exactly.
But I always trial things in a
in
play
production.
environment, a playground.
Yeah.
They're nowhere near my dev to production instances. There's a side instance for playing around with that kind of stuff.
Right,
It's been a trial.
but still for an ISV though, even if it's a sandbox environment, you don't want to refresh it every time. I think the managed solution. I'm anybody I've talked to who has been an adamant unmanaged, this is the way to be, have at least agreed that for an ISV, a managed solution is the way to go.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a tool published on AppSource. It's a workflow elements. So workflow custom assembly, and it's a plugin and 1 or 2 custom entities. There's no reason anybody needs to edit any parts of that. So I love having that out there as managed. You can just take it off, pull it right.
And that's actually a great point from a supportability. Like, imagine that, Aiden, you released that as an unmanaged solution. I load it in my environment and I actually mess up a bunch of stuff. And then I'm emailing you saying, Aiden, your tool is broken. Help me fix it. Mm-hmm. And you take one look and it's like, well, you completely messed everything up. And it's because if you gave it to me unmanaged. So that's why in those situations, like for the guys doing community tools or ISVs, I think that's important to be managed and for supportability.
Yeah. Before we move in, and I think we talk about, I guess, why does it make sense to go unmanaged when you're not an ISV? Let's talk about the best practice. And again, I'm doing air quotes best practice because this is a Microsoft best practice, which is whether you're an ISV or not, doesn't matter. You should customize your development environment and export managed solutions into test, and then the same solution after assuming you pass the test into production, right? So managed. Start on managed, then managed into test, and managed into production. Now again, the idea with this is to take advantage of the benefits of managed solutions over unmanaged solutions. So let's talk about those benefits first, and then let's talk about how they are not really benefits if you think about them in the real world. So, and this is for anyone, Nick, if you want to take this or anyone else, what are the benefits of using managed solutions?
Patching.
But in theory.
Oh, in theory, yeah, I would still agree. Like, there's the patching component. So if you needed to fix something to deploy a solution, you have the ability to create a patch. So a patch, the ideal, and we're talking, the idea here is, and I don't have the Microsoft documentation around it right in front of me to go through, but the idea is mission critical system, you need to apply a fix. A patch is a faster, quicker way through managed. You can do some patching in unmanaged solutions, but that was part of the arguments to help deploy those fixes. And then you can deploy a series of patches. And then when you finally do your update in a real maintenance window, you can update the full updated patch managed solution, and that will remove all those patches and get you up to the newer version.
But wouldn't that be more of a benefit for ISV solutions though than a company? Because I feel in a company you can just move the full solution.
Right, but there are some times where they can't afford that downtime, or there needs to be a patch deployed in the middle of the day or some of that. But again, you know what? I've never run into that, but this is what I've been read and we've been told.
Have any of you guys run into that where you think a patch makes more sense?
No, I mean, I haven't.
Yeah,
no.
If I have an unmanaged solution version 1 and I ship unmanaged solution, same name, version 1.1, that's effectively a patch for an unmanaged solution.
Exactly.
All that Nick's talking about is the new patching feature that came out around 2016, which was the ability to patch managed solutions, which previously couldn't be patched. So it was just more parity between the gap that was there between managed and unmanaged that Microsoft.
So I'll tell you why I just don't see patches as an advantage. The reason why I don't see a patch as an advantage is that we can create solutions that contain one field.
Right.
Or one chart, or one whatever. So even though I'm importing a full-on solution, not a patch, right? Consider a full-on unmanaged solution. If it just has like one field that insults on top of whatever other solution I had in there, it's effectively a patch, like you mentioned. We're not calling it officially a patch, but what's the advantage that I gain by actually using a legit official patch over an unmanaged solution with one field or whatever it is?
So you're talking. So again, there's two concepts we have here, right? So one is managed versus unmanaged, and one is the concept of patches. So are you talking about an unmanaged solution and using a patching approach? So we create a solution, we patch, we create all our changes between the core solution and then the multiple patches on top of that. Is that whether it's managed or unmanaged?
Managed.
Unmanaged.
Yeah, it has to be managed.
Yeah, okay. So you have a managed solution and you apply a managed patch, and then that's part of the.
That just sounds complicated already.
Oh, absolutely. But then if your patch breaks something, you could roll back that patch without rollbacking.
That sounds even more complicated.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just,
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Nick.
It's that's part of what they're trying to do, and to get to I want to call it a proper best practice ALM solution, but these are the arguments that, when you talk about the pristine lab best practice environment, but in the real world, it's like digging carrots with a backhoe. It's overkill in, I'd say, a lot of situations. And I know there's probably some guys that would disagree, but at the end of the day, if we have to apply a patch, well, we can actually apply that managed solution. If it breaks something, well, we can fix it.
I just feel that, again, if this was a massive solution, like default solution, like all of if that's the only option that we have, then patches will be great, because now I can add just one field or whatever, something small. But the fact that today in solutions we can add a very minimal amount of data or not data, sorry, configuration or functionality from one environment to another, it just makes the concept of a patch just more complicated to me.
So I had a Microsoft Fast Track engineer take a look at the solution, the production environment for one of our clients. This is when I worked for a big Microsoft partner recently in Australia. And he told the client that we're not following, my team are not following the Microsoft best practices because we had published unmanaged solutions into production. The client's like, should we ask for our money back? I'm like, it's $5 million. I don't want to give you your money back. And by the way, the Microsoft engineer is wrong.
Well, technically he's right.
He's right. It's Microsoft best practice. He's wrong because I'm going to ask him now to present the reasons why we should use managed solutions into production, and he's going to be unable to justify any of it. And his only argument was, Matt Barber says so. Now, from Matt Barber, for those of you who don't know him, he's the principal program manager. He's like a platform architect for Microsoft. He owns that solution framework. He built it. He's the brains behind it, and he's a really brainy guy.
Super.
And I kind of trust him when he says I should use managed. I just haven't found the benefit there in real life. And Matt, I'd love to hear more from you and your team. Help us understand why you think that is the best practice.
Yeah.
Roger Gilchrist from Microsoft Consulting in the UK published a white paper 5 or 6 years ago, and definitely was advocating for managed solutions, but the paper described some pretty complex scenarios, but still didn't really give me a better reason.
Not in the real world.
And I think, let's take a look at the future. So let's put on our future glasses here, and why. And this is why some of the other folks from Microsoft were promoting the whole concept of managed. And I don't quite see this scenario playing out, but let's just play along anyway. So it was a situation of, we're talking about the rise of the citizen developer.
Right.
And I believe that there's some perception that you're going to have all these, people creating their own power apps, their own flows, and a bunch of these tools internally in organizations. And what's going to happen is it's going to be managing all of these things and how they're going to be deployed and things like that. And it's just going to cause a mess of having hundreds of these, and they're going to be solution aware of all these solutions in a situation like that. Now, I don't see that happening because, first off, I see maybe there's going to be a few power users create power apps.
Yeah.
And that's still going to be who's ever managing the infrastructure, the IT department, whatever. They're still going to, they might encourage that, but there's still going to be some controls in place for that. So they're not going to allow, I don't see companies allowing hundreds of their users going willy-nilly creating power apps and environments and things like that.
No,
I don't see that happening.
100% right.
But that was sort of Microsoft's justification. This is going to help control the citizen developers.
Look, I've implemented solutions at companies that do engineering, and they are IT guys, like Microsoft partners in other products. So these guys are legit IT guys that I just don't think they're going to go around creating power apps. It's just they're unfamiliar with it. Now, I'm not saying this is every company in the world, but to think about the vast majority of users you've ever deployed Dynamics for, do you see what's the percentage of those users that you'll see actually creating a power app because they are having a problem and they're like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and create a power app to solve that problem?
I don't know. There's plenty of Lotus Notes applications out there. There's plenty of mission critical departmental spreadsheets that are on a shared server somewhere that all these compensation systems rely on or something crazy like that. Yeah. There's plenty of access databases that somebody built over the weekend and suddenly the whole department's using for expense management and crazy stuff like that.
I feel that the CRM admins for maybe the majority of my customers will be able to create a power app. I think that they would fit as a citizen developer. They would be able to own it and do it. but the regular outside salesperson or whatnot, I just don't see that as a reality. Not that they're unable to do it. I just don't think that they will actually make it happen, invest the time to get it done.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. One would be, it'll be interesting based on generations. So now that we have more people coming out of college that are more aware of what the app is and how to build apps, and it's how they grew up, we may have a generation coming into the workforce that expects that. And they say, if the problem's big enough, we've seen people say, hey, we're just going to do it in Excel. We talked about Access. And so they create their own thing. And so now we have people that are coming into the workforce that are aware of how to create Power Apps. And once they find out I can create an app myself, and this is a big enough issue and IT is not helping me out, you may see more people going into that route. So I'll be curious to see if that changes over time.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so we understand what the best practice is. Now, let's talk about what happens in the real world and what are some of the issues that we found. For me, obviously, plenty of situations in which somebody changed a managed solution and it was locked up. And the problem is that, again, some ISV solutions are open on purpose, so you have some sort of flexibility when it comes to updating them and customizing them to an extent, but then that locks them up forever. What are some of the other things that you guys have seen out there that you've run into situations that if you weren't using managed solutions that this wouldn't be an issue?
Copying of production to dev.
Oh,
Yes.
no, you just lost your source code. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know in a best practice situation, you should develop on your development system. When you're cool with that, that gets moved to your test system. Once it's been tested, approved, and green check marked, then you have that solution exported out of your dev system and you deploy that to production. That's best practices. That's nice, clean lab environment. Here's the reality. The average customer who may or may not even have an IT department, they may actually go through a series of different partners. They might bring in some independent consultants. All of a sudden, here they are 5 years later, they have their production system and they have their sandbox system. Their development system is a mess. There's crappy data in there. There's projects that were half started and left behind. So we need a new clean dev environment. Or
we need to test for the next upgrade. So let's get the latest production functionality so we can upgrade it in dev.
Correct. So here's what, and here's what happens. So to rebuild a clean dev environment from scratch, even if you have all the solutions backed up somewhere, whether they're in Azure DevOps or even on a file share somewhere, it would probably take, I don't know, guys, a day to rebuild a production system in the dev by installing, spinning up the new instance, loading the solutions, loading up some sample data, repointing to your different integrations. There's still some of that work you need to do. So that just is going to take hours upon hours. And guess what? Customers are, in the most part, paying us time and materials or paying us by the hour. So on the flip side, if I actually told a customer, I said, well, it's going to take a day to do it the proper way, or I could actually do it in about 30 minutes, the incorrect way, but the end result is exactly the same. What option is my customer going to tell me to follow?
Right.
Well, I think, Nick, I think the result's not exactly the same. I think it's better copying production down to dev because you get all of your data as well.
Absolutely.
If you do a full copy, yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yep.
A lot of the customers I work with run their custom portals out of Dynamics, and they manage basically all the data in Dynamics is responsible for the customer experience on the website, and they want to be able to test that. Every year when they're updating new data, they want to make sure they're testing with the most up to date data they have, and the data that's in there that's 2 years old is completely worthless to them.
Yeah, and that copy, minimal copies, full copies, they work great. So from what I understand behind the scenes, maybe you guys have a little bit more information about this. What happens is essentially your sandbox instance gets wiped out. They take a copy of the database and they spin up a new instance with that database in place. So it's an exact replica with everything moves from one environment to another.
Yeah, and a few things you got to watch out for. Obviously, you want to make sure your Exchange is integration is shut off, or even some live production integrations, because you don't want to copy over your backup CRM, your production to your dev, and then all of a sudden your integration to your ERP system is filling up with a bunch of duplicate data because it's being also pulled from your dev.
Yeah, that's exactly why I never recommend doing a backup and restore, because basically so all those integrations from production stay live in your sandbox, and that can create a real mess.
Right, but you can place instances in administration mode, which shuts down all the plugins and stuff. There's some other.
Right, but you're going to take it out of administration mode at some point to continue development.
That's where you should have
risky.
What I do is I have a checklist of here are the things you need to go through.
I don't. I just start with a clean instance, and I have a script that runs that installs all those solutions and all that data.
But you have a script, Neil. A lot, like I said, the situation where you go into a customer that's, like I said, it has a 10-year history of different consultants coming in, to build that those dev operation processes and those scripts and stuff. That takes a bit of time and overhead as well, and not everybody has that.
I just think doing it wrong takes longer and costs more in the end.
I'm saying like there's the right way and there's the right way. And
one of the things that we've run into before is that a customer is using sensitive data, and so they can't have production data back in their sandbox dev environments. And so again, I think it's interesting that Microsoft has allowed for that by copying over the configuration.
And where's Gustav with his GDPR statement right here?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and so the other thing too is, and that's just such a scary premise, that you're going to override your unmanaged solutions essentially by copying production into dev, and then it's
so let's talk about if you have managed solutions in production and you copy over your dev with your production.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And then your unmanaged solution, which is where everything came from, is now managed in dev too.
And if you don't have your unmanaged copies somewhere, whether it's again on a file share or in source control, and and you're right, the average customer, how are they supposed to know this?
Because you're supposed to export out of dev as a managed solution. You never export. Let me export first as unmanaged, and then as managed.
Well, if you're following proper solution management, then when you're exporting your managed solution, you also unmanaged a version of your unmanaged with that for source control.
Stick it in your back pocket.
But now again, we're adding some more administration and layering on that, which the average customer, you're adding extra cycles, and it's very hard to sell that benefit when a lot of times it really isn't there.
Yeah. So one of the questions kind of around this is, have you guys ever had an ISV that is no longer is around because they go out of business or something like that?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they had a managed solution come in, and now we're trying to upgrade, or we're trying to do this kind of stuff.
Or they fell out with a consulting partner, or it was an independent consultant who can't reach, and that managed solution, nobody knows where the original unmanaged version of it is,
and the customer never got a unmanaged copy of it.
Right. And now we can't.
Or the ISV got acquired by another company, and they no longer offer the solution. Or there's just on and on and on. The list just goes on and on and on. Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed too, and this probably didn't happen to you guys because this is, I refuse to believe this is a common practice, is we've worked with customers who work with a partner that essentially, in CRM Online or in Dynamics 365 Online, you have a free sandbox instance. So the partner that worked with them said, we're going to use this sandbox for test purposes, for UAT purposes. We will use our own instance for dev. Okay, so we'll develop from ours. We'll put it on your test environment, your sandbox. You test on that, and then we'll move it into production. Now, what this partner did is they moved managed solutions into the test environment. And when things weren't working out, they weren't finishing, something was happening, this customer went to the partner and said, look, I don't think this is working out. I think I'm going to switch to another partner. And all of their functionality was in a managed solution. And the original partner that wasn't doing their job essentially said, well, if you do that, we're not going to give you the unmanaged solution. We're going to uninstall the managed solution and pull all the functionality back. Now, obviously, you could argue that the customer had already paid for all that work, right? Because it was time and materials based, and they could have sued them or whatever it was to try to find that functionality. The partner said, look, there's some legal verbiage in our contract that says you only get to own it after we're done, and we're not done. And we are the ones who get to say when we're done. So we'll pull the plug on that. So essentially what happened, and this is a case that happened to me, this customer decided to hire us. They did, can you guys scope all of the functionality that is on the managed solution. We scoped it. We told them how much it would be to recreate everything from scratch. And they decided to pay us to redo everything from scratch just so they can cut ties with that other partner. So have you ever seen a case where that can happen, where your functionality is held hostage, essentially, at that point by a managed solution?
Not held hostage, but there's been, let's say, abandonment issues where you go in and it's like, okay, who wrote this? And we have to chase down the former partner. And of course, that's usually not a very fruitful thing. So to me, it kind of comes down to legalities. I'm very much always operated. The customers own. We're building it for the customers. Right. I was never in the business of creating IP that we resell. I looked into it and kind of realized there's a lot of work with that. I think that's bad business.
It is. I've heard stories. Fortunately, I've got no first-hand experience, but yeah, I've definitely heard the horror stories of it happening. And like Nick, most of my contracts have been consultant for hire. So we work on behalf of the customer, and they always own the intellectual property. There's been occasions where there's been a very explicit agreement between the consultancy and the customer that we have built an industry accelerator or some kind of template that they are going to receive as a managed solution, but that's our intellectual property. And maybe there's some co-investment that goes into that. But at the end of the day, you can't stuff your customers up by refusing to hand over the
And my piece of advice to customers is make sure you own your assets. And if you're not comfortable with something, have your legal department go through everything as well. Like you have, and as a partner has rights, but a customer has rights as well. And, at the end of the day, it's it shouldn't be an us versus them. A Dynamics 365, the most successful projects I've ever been involved in have been collaborative efforts between the partner and the customer, and those are the success. And that should be, based on respect and everything else. So when you get already into this, where we're going to own this and we're gonna hold you hostage and all this other stuff, like I know that's not the language that's used in the initial meeting, but if that's already the intent. Yeah. That's not great.
Yeah, and I just piggyback onto that. I think setting that expectation and understanding at the beginning of a project. Gus had a session this week about picking the right partner, and so understanding during that selection process, understanding where are they coming from, where are you coming from, and at the end of the day, who owns what. Just setting that expectation up front, and then having that as part of the scope of work or the master service level agreement, just helps that discussion go a little smoother. Doesn't mean it goes smooth when you're leaving somebody, but helps define that.
Absolutely. So if we think about the benefits of the managed solutions, which we talked about the fact that you can uninstall it, we talked about the fact that you can patch it, right? What else is out there that could be seen as a benefit of using a managed solution?
Well, I think Nick alluded to it earlier, there is a little bit of intellectual property protection that comes with managed solutions that definitely doesn't come with unmanaged. There's not a whole lot. Like all your schema is there. People can reverse engineer plugins and things, so there's not a lot of protection there. If you use Azure and other cloud services wisely within your solution architecture, then yes, that's probably the best level of intellectual property protection.
There's some kind of black box sitting somewhere that you get to control.
That's right. Yeah. And the code that's running on Azure, customers get no access to, right? It's just a service that your solution consumes, and it's licensed, and you control which customer solutions can access that. Then you're good.
And I think that's where you talk about the partners providing managed solutions, and that's where the software agreement comes in. Are they building a solution for you, the customer? Or are they licensing software to you? And there's two very clear differences there. So if they're licensing software to you, then that is, a managed solution. It's like being an ISV, right? And, but if it's a case of, they're building something a very bespoke solution, and that's the agreement, then, there's no intellectual property to protect because that's not going out into the wild. Where if it is an accelerator, things like that, and again, we're not selling you that, we are licensing that to you. Right. And I think that's a valid reason to protect that with a managed solution.
So here's a situation somewhat in the middle. Imagine you're a global IT department and you're building a CRM solution that's going to be rolled out globally, but it's going to be used, let's say, in 4 different regions. It's going to be 4 different instances, or maybe one for each country, and you've got 100 countries, and they're all going to use a local version for whatever reason. Is it valid for an internal development team at that company to build a managed solution so that they can deploy it almost as if they're an ISV, or would you still encourage those customers to use unmanaged?
Well, is it being developed centrally?
Yeah,
But it's just going to be within that corporation only?
that's right.
I would say if it's being developed centrally, then I don't see, again, I'm missing the benefit of providing a managed solution. Well, hold on. It could go both ways, but if you could supply that managed solution, that bug that might be introduced in that managed solution will be everywhere. So then you send out the new managed solution that will fix that bug. So it's not like you do the managed and you can patch that and whatever else. If it goes outside the company, then we talked about that. If it's almost if it's meant as an accelerator and each division of that company is going to build upon that, again, it depends on the situation, but I don't see what's the benefit of having that managed.
There's no real world benefits. I mean, it's I wish we could get to another conclusion, but I mean, there's nothing. And
This podcast episode could be so much shorter.
yeah. So could have knocked this out.
I need to ask this question. I got 4 MVPs here. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little, but there's this rumor going around that eventually it's going to be forced to be managed solutions.
Yes. So I heard that rumor this week too, and I was about to bring it up, which is some people are talking about that. Well, what if Microsoft pulls the plug on unmanaged solutions in production? So obviously, at the instance level, online, you have to pick whether it's a sandbox or a production instance. So with that, they could force, somehow, the fact that every solution in there is managed, right? So I thought about it, and I'm like, well, should I be scared about that, right? The answer is no. There's no reason to be scared about that. Why? Because as long as you have the unmanaged solution, you can always export it as managed and import it as managed in production.
Or you just buy yourself another sandbox, call it production, and never use the actual production instance at all.
Yeah, so that is true. There's really no extra benefit to having an actual production environment over the sandbox. There's no big difference there. But no, I mean, for me, is like, I imagine, like, in my own environment, I'm moving unmanaged from dev to UAT to production. If tomorrow Microsoft said that instance, has to be production or has to be managed solution only, I just go to dev, export manage into UAT and into production, and I'm done.
I don't see, to be quite honest, I do not see that happening until there's built-in application lifecycle management tools directly into the platform where your average IT department, citizen developer, power user can go into dev, make a change, and press a button, and then production is updated. A one-button click deployment, and that does not exist.
Well, so here's the thing. The other thing I thought about is, it's part of this whole rumor that Microsoft could be pulling the plug or whatever, is where is the benefit for them to do that? I mean, they have to spend hours or days making this happen, making this restriction happen, and once it goes through tests and all the headaches and all of that, and okay, good, now we force people to use production, manage solutions in productions only. That's it. Where's the benefit for them? Like, what do they gain from this?
There would be support. So let's just say that you built Gus's super solution, you employed it to production, something goes wrong with production. Now the support engineer has the ability to take a look and say, hey, customer, remove Gus's super solution and let's see if the problem still exists.
Right, but that would delete from your production. If you're uninstalling a managed solution, that's going to delete any of your data associated with that.
Well, or you make a copy of production, you remove that.
And then somebody modify Gus's super solution, and customer go ahead and uninstall it. Oh, I can't. He's giving me an error because I can't uninstall it, and now it's a works ticket. Right. So,
I was just a random thought.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to be devil's advocate.
Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah.
The other one I think is interesting. If you talk to our F&O counterparts, I mean, that's the way that they've grown up, and that's the way they do it. It's just part of their life cycle. And when I've trained individuals like that, I've trained the support team for our company, and they really blew their mind that there was this concept of unmanaged solutions. What do you mean there's unmanaged? You don't have to go to Microsoft to submit something and they validate it before it gets uploaded and stuff like that?
Well, let's take a look, even go back further in the past and look at Great Plains. How Great Plains worked with their customizations is you can't modify what we would refer to as almost the default layer or the default solution at all. Everything is built on top of that. So you could actually editing one file in a Great Plains install will remove all customizations and add-ons.
Wow.
And not destroy or anything. Like, your data is still there, but because you can't really add fields or tables to Great Plains. But you not directly to the existing out of the box tables. ISVs can add tables and things like that. But you effectively, I could give me a Great Plains environment, and probably, if I remember how back to do it, we could probably get a pretty clean environment pretty quickly.
Right, and that's another difference too when you're using managed versus unmanaged. Is if you uninstall a managed solution, all the data is gone. Right, because you could have a solution, use it for like 4 years, and then it's like, oh, we don't need this anymore, and then you go back and uninstall it, and all your 4 years of data will be wiped out. Whereas with unmanaged, that's not the case. They're just a container for solutions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think about it like a box full of groceries. I can come home from the supermarket with either a box full of groceries, put the whole box in my cupboard. If I uninstall it, it's like me taking the box out with all the groceries still in it. An unmanaged solution is like a paper bag full of those groceries. And I take the groceries out and put them in my cupboard, and now I've got the paper bag that's just the unmanaged container, and I can throw that away. It doesn't matter if the groceries are still in the cupboard.
But I think going back to Seth's point about F&O, I don't know F&O, and this goes on this is another discussion about Dynamics 365. That's a collection of different products that are vastly different from each other. But going back to that F&O thing, I'm willing to bet that their structure for customizations fits a better model for that application lifecycle management than. And don't get me wrong, I love CRM, I love that whole platform, but that whole managed solution framework has not been engineered the best way.
No, but if you look at Dynamics today, with when you add project service automation and field service and all of that, there's 333 entities inside of Dynamics 365. That's 333 tables in SQL. There's 7,000 in finance and operation or something like that. It's insane, the size of the product compared to Dynamics. I mean, it's 20 times big. It's crazy. So I can see how they want to put a couple of more controls in place, because there's just a lot more complex on that side. So, when I heard, again, just going back to the comments about Microsoft locking up the ability to install or import unmanaged solutions into a production instance, I just can't see the benefit for Microsoft to do that. I just can't see it. I can't see the benefits of using managed solutions to begin with, and I can't see the benefits with providing or prohibiting the ability to importing an unmanaged solutions to begin with. So it was like, why would they do it? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I guess the only thing would be is if it changes the paradigm, and we're no longer talking about unmanaged and managed. We're talking about once it's in production, it's locked, right? And so it's not this concept of unmanaged and managed. If it's in production, you can't change it. And so we have that concept of a managed solution is configurable and stuff like that. But once it's in there, I
would have no problem if let's even take the managed versus unmanaged. If they lock down, you are not allowed to edit the configuration in production.
Right.
If they lock that,
would be
I'd be
more
okay with
effective.
That. Absolutely.
A more effective setting. That would be different.
That's different.
Whether it's unmanaged or managed, you can't edit production. Yes. I'm in for that.
Yeah, I think that's a good setting to have. I work with a lot of organizations now, and most of them tend to be smaller, and they don't want the overhead of having to worry about making a change in development environment and rolling out to their test environment and then up to production. If you have 5 employees, the more time you spend on that, it has a pretty big impact on how much work you can get done or how much money you can bill. And obviously, with a small company, that's going to be tighter than a large company. So I think the smaller an organization is, the smaller the IT department is, the less
the less rigor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this episode, I'm just thinking about the fact that today 5 strangers, well, not strangers, we sort of know each other, but 5 different people with different backgrounds from different countries. We have Australia and Canada, and Aiden, let's just say you live in South Africa, just to make it more interesting. People from different places came, and again, really, I didn't know where you guys were coming from. I think I had an idea with Neil, because we've talked about this before, and Neil's a smart guy. But other than that, I didn't really know what to expect. But again, as we wrap up this episode, does any of you have any recommendations when it comes to managed versus unmanaged? And again, we're not talking ISV because I think globally we all agree that ISVs should stick with managed solutions to have a little bit more control over their IP. But is there any reason that you see why would a non-ISV company use managed solutions to move functionality from between environments?
So, Gus, like I said, I've never used a managed solution to transport any customizations in my life yet, and I haven't seen any reasons recently why I would change that. Even with all the new features that Microsoft keeps adding to the managed solution framework, I still don't see a compelling reason why I would switch. And after our discussion tonight, it's been really useful. There's been some great blog articles and great debate recently. I still don't see a reason to shift that. I got to believe Matt Barber is a really smart guy. Lots of really,
and I wanna,
really bright people in his team. So it might be different in the future, but I don't see any reason right now.
And the frustrating part is that I want to interview him, but I don't think I'm smart enough to interview Matt. I feel like I need some help to get Matt on board. And you did talk about a couple of articles, because one of the things that I think started the conversation is obviously I recorded the part. The interesting part is that on the last episode I recorded, and like the next day or maybe within hours, Jonas Rapp, another CRM MVP, came up with an article pretty much very much pro managed solution, and he gave all his reasons. And I mean, if I can summarize his article, he said something like, if Microsoft is saying we should use these solutions, just listen to them and use managed solutions. That's the way I can summarize his article. Now, we were talking about a couple of other articles that are more, I don't think they're pro-managed or pro-unmanaged. They sort of shared, what are the differences, and you sort of make a decision, and I'll add the link into the description of this podcast. But again, just going back to the original question, which was, for non-ISVs, Nick, do you see any benefit of recommending the use of managed solutions? Where would it fit? What do you think?
Personally, for me, I don't see it fitting. Now, you talked about Jonas. I think Jonas is of the mindset of keeping, following the best practices, keeping things in their place, and very organized, very structured. But again, I don't see the benefit of that. But I would say that if for people, if they're not convinced, they want to do managed solutions, then I would say please do it correctly. Have a proper ALM, a proper governance, a proper source control. But at the end of the day, you're spending a lot of extra money when I really don't see that return on investment. I like to use you've heard me say before, the digging carrots with a backhoe. You're adding a lot of overhead with not the benefit for it, if you're a non-ISV.
Yes. And that's where I see the truth of it. Is like you mentioned, if you're going to do managed, then follow the right ALM and have all these checks in place to make sure you don't mess up. And I feel that by you doing this overwhelming amount of work and caution and training to deal with managed solutions, you essentially get the same safety that you have with an unmanaged solution by default, without even trying hard, right? Because all of these safety precautions that you're taking is essentially, look, that way you don't overwrite your unmanaged solution and lose your source code. That way you don't lock it up, right? You need to prevent people from editing it, customizing it. That way you don't lock it up so you can uninstall it. So doing all that stuff is something that is a non-issue with an unmanaged solution.
Nick, I don't think you're suggesting, because I use unmanaged solutions, but I still have a good ALM strategy.
Yeah.
I still have a lot of governance.
Absolutely.
I still put stuff in source control.
No, so, I think that's best. I think, but we could. You can recover from having a bad ALM strategy with unmanaged solutions. Yeah. So if you go into that client that's been using Dynamics for 10 years and things are a little bit of a mess, but if it's unmanaged, you can clean that up and you can recover. Right. Yep. If they had managed solutions in a bad ALM situation, you're in for a lot of work.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah, I understand you were trying to just be nice to Jonas. So,
hey, I respect Jonas. He's a smart guy, but yes. I think we disagree, and we agree to disagree on things, and that's what the MVPs do, and I think we should continue to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Seth, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to give the consulting answer. It depends. So everybody else seems to be unmanaged. I think Neil brought up an awesome point where there's this concept of a global company that has multiple environments around the world. Compare that to Aided in an organization that just has 5 people. And so if you have that global company, and it was discussed earlier, is they almost in themselves have become an ISV. And so what they're doing is they're taking that and they're pushing it out to their other locations. And so I would be interested, again, I think we've talked about the pros and cons around that, but I think that's a different paradigm, right? So even though it's one company, there may be a use case for that. So I may be the only one that disagrees in this room right now. So anyways, yeah, so I think it depends, as always, what your situation is, who you're working with, what your need is. And as an end customer that ultimately gets the solution, is understanding what you have in place from an IT department, and make sure that you don't ultimately accumulate technical debt that you're going to have to pay at some point, whether that's having managed solutions that you now cannot uninstall and have to work around that, or you're making configurations directly in prod.
Yeah, I don't buy it, Seth.
You don't buy it? You don't buy what I'm selling, huh?
Yeah, no, but again, it's all based on my own experience, and I haven't had the opportunity to deal with a global company where I would say, yeah, I think managed solutions make sense on this one. Aiden, what do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense, what you said. I don't want to be in a situation where if I'm maintaining those solutions for that customer, where I'm handicapping myself. And we all know we shouldn't make customizations directly on production. But I don't want to remove that option either. And by using unmanaged solutions, I can still do that. We can restrict other users from making those same customizations in other ways, using security rules and things like that, right? So it's not always a huge concern, and there are other steps we can take to mitigate that.
Absolutely. So I think it's pretty good consensus. Again, I just wanted to bring you guys in here to see where I was standing with this thing. I think that, overwhelmingly, if we had all 84 MVPs in here, or 90 or whatever we have, and we had this show with 90 people, I don't think we would all agree. Of course, we know Jonas is on the other side. He's on the dark side. Right? Well, maybe we are on the dark side.
Maybe we are.
I think we're on the dark
Who
side,
knows?
but it's all good.
I don't think we would all agree, of course, but I think overwhelmingly most of us would agree that there's no real world benefit for managed solutions on non-ISV applications. And again, I wanted you to bring your expertise and people listening to this to be able to get a different perspective than just me ranting about it on every episode, which is what it seems to be the case. So before we go, so people know who was here and how to reach you in case they have a question or whatever it is, what's the best way to reach you, Neil Benson?
So I'm Neil Benson. You can reach me at Customery. That's the word customer with a Y on the end. My blog is customery.com. My Twitter handle is Customery. I'm linkedin.com/Customery is my company.
Wow.
You can reach out to me on all of those channels.
That's awesome. Nick?
Yeah. Nick Dolman. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just do a search, you'll find me. Twitter handle is at ReadyXRM. That's ready with a Y, XRM. And
Is it ready without a Y?
no, I was just bugging Neil. Anyways, so I'll turn it over to Seth.
Yeah, Seth Bacon. You can find me on Twitter at Seth T Bacon. There was another person with the same name, so I had to take the. So it's Seth T Bacon on Twitter, and then the blog is The Bacon Bites. That's BYTES.com.
Awesome.
And I'm Aiden Cuskella. It's at CuskellaSolutions.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Aiden Cuskella.
Absolutely. And you can find all of our episodes at CRMMVPpodcast.com, and obviously follow us on Twitter at CRMMVP Podcast for news about new episodes and to make recommendations and guests for future episodes or any questions you may have. You can also email us at info@CRMMVPpodcast.com.
I would like if you should interview Matt Barber.
That would be a disaster. I'm not smart enough, but we'll see. We'll get somebody, some super smart guy. Maybe Guyan can do it.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
Get David Yak and Matt slinging
That'll
out.
be a good clash. But we'll see. But again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you guys for being on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.